Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nancy Muir from Miles for Hips, and I'm here with Dr. Emily Schaeffer. Dr. Schaeffer is the Director of Research for the Pediatric Orthopedic Department at British Columbia Children's Hospital in Canada. She is the co-founder of the Hip Hope Network and leads the Hippy Lab research team, as well as a number of other international multi-center research studies related to hip health. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Nancy. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, first of all, would you like me to call you Dr. Schaeffer or Emily or
No,
what's
call me Emily.
okay? So, like, first of all, just real general, I would love you to share with us a little bit about your background and how you became interested in hip dysplasia and this work specifically.
Yeah, I don't have a straightforward path to where I got here, but my background is actually more in basic science. I did my undergraduate degree in biochemistry at the University of British Columbia, but I was always very much certain that I wanted to be in the medical healthcare field as a researcher. I was never interested in actually going to medical school or anything like that, and I always just wanted to solve sort of methodological problems and help tackle medical issues from the research side of things. But my journey to kind of get to orthopedics and then to hip dysplasia sort of was a stepwise process from really basic science and biochemistry and understanding all of the research work that I was doing in undergrad as a co-op student. Was fascinating, but was still so far removed from where you would see the impact directly in patients' lives. And so I kind of stepwise moved closer from towards sort of direct clinical research through doing my PhD in a translational medicine program, and then finally landing at BC Children's Hospital in the orthopedics department for a postdoctoral fellowship after finishing is really where I was able to combine. I'm a lifelong athlete, runner. Movement is so important to me. Um, and I also grew up like coaching soccer for little kids and things like that. Is that just that sort of pediatric orthopedics and sort of that everything sort of coming together. So that was where I sort of first came to orthopedics and met Dr. Kishore Mulpuri, the orthopedic surgeon that I work most closely with, where there was an opportunity at the time when I came in to do my postdoc to sort of join. At the time, the International Hip Dysplasia Institute was running this study on hip dysplasia. And that was where I came in to sort of help overhaul the study and sort of move it forward. And that's what it's grown into our Global Hip Dysplasia Registry today. And it just was an immediate click as a passion for me and has been a lot of my life ever since. So yeah.
That's wonderful, and such a different entrance into so many of the other people
Yes.
we've talked to who either have backgrounds as patients and healthcare providers, and that's why I thought this is really fun to get to meet someone like you who fell into this. I mean, certainly a very academic path, and it made sense,
Yeah.
but it was kind of an opportunity arose, and it's
Yes.
become
Yeah.
quite a passion,
hmm
project as well as your profession. So
Yes, absolutely.
that's amazing. And you talked about, I know we'll delve into this deeply, but you started talking about this registry. Could you tell everybody a little bit about the International Hip Dysplasia Registry?
Yeah, so the Global Hip Dysplasia Registry, or GHDR, it was an evolutionary process that came from that original International Hip Dysplasia
Mhm.
Institute study that I mentioned with IHDI, where when I started working with Kishore in 2014, this IHDI research study was underway. It was a fantastic study. It involved 8 or 9 centers mostly in North America, one center in the UK and one center in Australia. But it was a very specific in scope study. So it was looking at only a small subset of kids that had the most severe form of DDH under a specific age, and that we would follow the patients for only 2 years. Um, we quickly sort of came to realize that there were so many other unanswered questions around hip dysplasia that would impact a far broader group of kids and families that we weren't going to be able to answer with that limited scope of the study, and also recognizing um, that while we wanted to be a truly global study, we were international with some sites, but we were not truly globally representing a huge part of the population. And so the Global Hip Dysplasia Registry evolved from that seed that really set us up for success from the International Hip Dysplasia Institute study and evolved into a longitudinal sort of over time collecting data for this registry, where we expanded the number of different sites and centers that were contributing data from patients all over the world. So we now have over 30 centers that are contributing data across all 6 inhabited continents. And we have over 8,000 patients that have been enrolled in that are active participants in the registry. And it's been fantastic to see that evolution. And it really truly has become sort of the foundation of a lot of the different research projects that we have going and beyond research into sort of then translation into clinical care and advocacy and education efforts and things like that too.
That is amazing. And I would love to, I definitely want to delve into some of the projects. I thought even
Yeah.
before that, maybe we could just step back a second for people watching this who might not be familiar with the concept of like a registry or
Yeah.
longitudinal research. Could you just share a little bit, like just the basics of what that means and what that means about the data that's collected and how it can be used?
Yeah, so it's a great question. The big value in sort of a registry is it gives us a place where we can collect. So we're collecting clinical data. So we're collecting just basic information about about the patients and their demographics. So like, age they were diagnosed and basic information about sort of like were they born in a hospital, were they born in a rural setting, things about different risk factors for hip dysplasia, elements related to their diagnosis that they originally had. And so the longitudinal aspect, what that means is that we're following all of these patients over time throughout their care journey as their care is happening. So we're collecting the data sort of in real time as it happens. And we've laid out, very specific data that we want to collect. And so it helps increase sort of the higher quality. It's higher quality data when you can collect something as it's happening rather than looking backwards at clinically collected data. And so this has become the largest prospective registry of clinical data on kids that have hip dysplasia in breadth and scope in terms of, the amount of the globe that we're covering in terms of where patients are coming from as well, which is very important, that sort of global relevance piece because there's so like large populations that are impacted with hip dysplasia around the world. And it's important to understand whether there's differences and similarities and how we can best sort of come together and find the best ways to manage this broad sort of spectrum of a problem that hip dysplasia is.
And this is so important. I mean, even thinking about what we did in Miles for Hips back in March, we did or actually in April, we did we usually do a theme week every year. And this year we decided to look at hip dysplasia internationally and learn a little bit about how it's managed and approached in different areas of the world. And we still had a very relatively small window of places that we learned about. But to even see the care variation just
Yes,
between
yeah,
even different countries, not even necessarily talking multiple, we had a couple of continents represented, but there is so much to learn about this diagnosis
yes,
from all over the world. And there definitely is huge variation in care. And like you said, there's so much that we still need to understand. And what you highlighted, this is so wonderful. I think I don't know if people understand the concept of prospective versus retrospective research, but in prospective, just like you said, the data is being collected in real time versus retrospective, you're digging back through old records and there's missing information, there's incomplete
yeah.
information, there's things that you can kind of guess at but don't actually know for certain. So I mean, this is amazing. You said about 8,000 patients
Yes, we
are
have
enrolled who are
just
being
just over
followed.
8,000 patients enrolled that we're following.
Yeah,
Yes,
and the
yeah,
higher the numbers, the more we can truly start learning, what is luck versus what is actually
exactly.
working.
Yeah, yeah. And it
So,
lets us sort of, identify, it's enough patients to identify specific areas of care that might be the best and then design more, we can design sort of offshoot studies that are
Mhm.
designed specifically to answer those questions in a really high quality way. So,
And I know you're working on some, and I
yes.
know you said there were a couple that you were really excited about. So
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
giving you the floor. Tell us about some of the work that you're
Yeah.
currently either working on or just wrapping up or getting ready to start wherever you're at.
Yeah, so I'll touch on sort of three major areas, I think.
Yeah.
One sort of most directly from what I was just saying is where having this sort of breadth of this like wide scope of data in the registry now with over 8,000 patients is we are identifying sometimes in case we well, so when we went into the registry, we had questions we knew that needed to be answered, and then we're also now discovering other questions that should be answered on the basis of the data that we've collected so far. And what this is sort of allowing us to do is utilize these global collaborations and relationships that we have from all of our wonderful sites and surgeon collaborators and clinicians and patients and families around the world to now design sort of a series of what we call like randomized control trials or sort of comparative effectiveness studies. So what that lets us do is kind of in a very controlled way to come up with like best evidence is to actually randomly allocate patients to different treatment types so that we can actually make an informed decision on what is the best treatment. So currently we are underway with our first RCT or randomized control trial from within GHDR. So within the registry, we have many of our collaborating sites within the registry have chosen to participate in the RCT. And we are now looking at a very small specific subset of kids that have what we call radiological hip dysplasia. So hip dysplasia is a big spectrum, as I'm sure like many people are aware that it can range in severity and range in type of what the diagnosis is. And babies that have radiological hip dysplasia, it's hard to detect because what it means is their hips, when you examine them clinically, don't have any instability. So unless you take some kind of imaging, like an X-ray or do an ultrasound, you actually have no way of knowing that they have hip dysplasia until later in childhood or in adulthood when hip problems start coming up. Um, and so we are doing a randomized control trial looking at this specific subset of patients and trying to understand if brace treatment when they're really, really young, like under 3 months of age, is actually necessary, or whether if we're just monitoring their hips carefully, we can maybe avoid giving them treatment for some of these patients. And so that is one big study that we have going on that's come directly from the registry and kind of from that. So that's one area. I don't know if you have any questions before I talk about some of the other projects, but
No, I
yeah,
think, but just to highlight once again for the viewers, so an
yeah,
RCT in research is a very high quality study. So
yes, yeah,
these are the kind of studies that we need, and they're very hard to get
yes,
approved just
yeah,
because of you there has to be so much preliminary work and so much work on the ethics side of things to make sure that we really are truly doing right by
yeah, and that
patients and
everything is
families and
safe
medical
and
providers and that yeah so there's just to say that yeah
Mhm.
these are amazing projects and congratulations on getting an
Thank you.
RCT up and running because that is not a small feat so just
Yeah,
wanted to
thank
highlight that
you.
for our
Yeah.
viewers.
Yeah, it really gives you the sort of the strongest
Mhm.
foundation for saying we need to change clinical care in this direction because this has shown, which other studies are all helpful for that and build towards that, but the RCT will really make a big difference in that
Yeah,
regard.
this is exciting.
Um,
When do you think
yeah,
that would be rolling out? What's the
so the
timeline?
RCT is underway,
Okay.
but it is, it's a probably a 6 year long
Yep.
study, kind of thing. It will take a long time to recruit enough patients and across the world, but we have many of our centers that are recruiting patients actively, for this study. So we're looking at probably about 5 or 6 more years with this,
Yeah.
but
And that's
it'll
amazing
be,
though, because yes, you need the number of patients because that's
yeah,
what gives your study strength. But then you also need, like you said, this is a longitudinal
yes,
component. So you need to be able to follow people over time because if you follow them for 3 months, Yeah, you
Yeah,
can
we don't
actually
know the
study outcomes,
answer.
or
Yeah.
you actually don't know how that affects things long term. So this is
Yeah.
common with a lot of research that
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
a lot of
It
science
takes time.
involved.
Yeah. And then sort of another area of, well, it was started as research, but is now moving more into sort of like implementation and sort of clinical care is what also came out of our collaborations established with the Global Hip Dysplasia Registry and this concept that you touched on, Nancy, that was like there's so much variability between surgeon to surgeon, between clinician to clinician, between center to center, country to country in terms of care. Um, there's also differences, in locations in terms of access to appropriate care and appropriate
Yeah.
screening. That it started this program that we've now called our Global Care Pathways program. So we started this as a collaboration with our wonderful and fantastic group in India who contribute to the registry. This was really spearheaded by Dr. Alaric Arujas in Mumbai, in collaboration with our team in Vancouver and GHDR more generally, is to start with developing a care pathway for screening and diagnosis of DDH or hip dysplasia in India. Because in India, there's different resources available, different healthcare system. A lot of kids in India were being diagnosed very late with hip dysplasia in comparison to many places in, say, the global north. And so we brought together sort of society-wide sort of representation from pediatricians, orthopedic surgeons, radiologists, neonatologists, family physicians, nurses, etc. in India, and went through a consensus process to build a care pathway for specifically catered to the local context of the Indian healthcare system in India. And so that we developed a few years ago now and is now sort of been taken up with the support of this foundation called the Divi's Foundation for Children that supports work in India in collaboration with UNICEF India to actually support the implementation of this care pathway. But what has come from that is this broader now we have a blueprint. We have instructions now that we've set up how to do this process and develop a care pathway. And so we've now taken that map of how to create a care pathway and done the same process in Sri Lanka, and we've now brought it home and we're doing it in Canada because we don't have a standard care pathway in Canada. So we're taking what we learned from our global partners and bringing it back home to Canada for us. And we're now we're in the midst of the consensus process in Canada now to develop this care pathway with the Canadian context in mind. And we've done this with an approach of sort of a pay it forward model. So Dr. Arujis, who I mentioned, was the spearheader of the Indian care pathway. He actually sat in on the entire Sri Lankan process as a mentor
Oh, wow.
for that group. One of the Sri Lankan, so we hope now we're carrying forward on doing some preliminary work with Dr. Patricia Moreno in Brazil to sort of try to get that one going. And one of the Sri Lankan team members hopefully will help with the Brazil pathway and we'll sort of keep that sort of pay it forward model going around to sort of be able to develop these region specific and context specific care pathways for DDH. So
Oh, wow. I love it.
that's another aspect of it that I'm so passionate about that we get to
Yeah.
do for
What
this. Yeah.
what kind of things are included along the care pathway? I'm assuming we're talking about care as far as treatment, but also
Yeah,
diagnosis,
it's
access.
largely
Yeah.
focused on from birth to getting the baby appropriately diagnosed and
Okay.
into the hands of a pediatric orthopedic surgeon for
Mhm.
management or a pediatric orthopedic specialist for management and care. So it's things about, who should get screened and when, and who should do the screening to try to detect DDH in the first place and or hip dysplasia in the first place and what does that look like in the context of the healthcare system? In India it was like how do we make sure that all these kids that are in rural settings and don't have access necessarily to a hospital center, a doctor? Can we provide education and training to the community healthcare workers that are specific to
Mhm.
some of those rural areas?
Yeah.
And provide, like, these are the tests that should be done on a baby that's up to 3 months of age, and these are the tests that should be looked at if they're older than that. And sort of what the India Care pathway sort of settled around on was to have to build in um, uh, hip checks that happen in conjunction with the vaccination visits or the immunization visits, because that is something that is well
Mhm.
mandated nationally, and they
Yeah.
have these visits. So we kind of tried to sort of tag team on what was already available as resources. And then sort of, if you detect this, what should you escalate to, and sort of next step,
Mhm.
just to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks in terms of a diagnosis, and we can try to reduce the late
Yeah.
diagnoses and allow for much more um, like brace management when the baby is very young, and then hopefully no long-term consequences from it at a much lower rate. So
That's phenomenal. And I mean, just such incredibly exciting work. And what I appreciate though with the work you're doing too is that, countries like India, Sri Lanka, I mean, places that historically, very different medical model, history of more late diagnoses, but also recognizing that even within Canada, there's not an
yeah,
established pathway. And I know here in the United States, that's something that I've been talking to a lot of people about is the lack of a standardized care model. And we've got some individuals or people groups looking to try to see how we can change that and prevent late diagnoses. Because this is a problem even in first world countries, even
yeah,
in big cities, even in places with of course rural areas, everything, but even places that have access to everything. It's
exactly.
how do we get these care pathways truly going for everybody? And I think it's amazing that, yeah, you're actually like paying it forward, but then also being the
Bringing it
recipients
back.
of your own learning, right?
Yeah,
I mean, just
exactly.
what
Yeah.
an incredible program. So that's very exciting. We'll be eager to follow along with that, for
hmm
sure. Then you mentioned there was a third.
Yeah, so the third aspect has really been over the last couple of years been spearheaded. We have a master's student who just defended her thesis and just graduated, so Denisha De
Yeah.
Silva. She really spearheaded is we have been really focused on trying to um, better uh, understand first the lived experiences of patients and family members that have gone through hip dysplasia diagnosis and subsequent treatment, and also then better involve them as true patient and or parent partners in co-developing sort of research studies as we go forward, so that we make sure that we are doing research that is important to answer the questions that are important to the patients and families that actually experience this. If we can decide what we want, what we think is important, but it really only matters if it's important to the people that are experiencing it. And so Denisha's master's project was actually a series of focus groups with a series we had such great buy-in from this. We had a number of parents and caregivers of children that had gone through treatment for hip dysplasia that participated in focus groups with us, as well as a number of patients who were very, very willing to give their time and discuss their care journey with us. And then we from that focus group work, we've been able to sort of identify ma major areas of what their experience was, how we can
Mhm.
help, fill in any gaps in resources and education that was available to them, and awareness to our medical providers as to better support them on their journey, and sort of target areas where we can do that, as well as we've now created like a patient and parent advisory council from that's going to be working more longitudinally with the Hippy Lab to help inform the research that we do and help co-prioritize research questions and things like that. So that's another aspect that's been really important to our lab to get going. And Denisha really sort of brought that forward. And now we're ready to sort of keep that going and expand to, we do other hip conditions as well. So expand that sort of
Mhm.
patient and parent involvement in all of our research too. So.
That's
Yeah.
I mean, I just love that, and I think at, Miles for Hips, one of the big things that we truly believe in is this concept of participatory medicine, which is exactly what you all are emulating up in Canada, and at the Hippy Lab and through the Hip Hope Network, which is really recognizing that good healthcare requires a huge team involvement,
Yes.
and that
Hmm.
team has to involve patients and families. These are the recipients and the people who are the
Yeah.
beneficiaries of
Yes.
healthcare, and
But they
to
are
really
also the experts on the condition with their lived experience.
exactly, and to
Yeah.
miss that, which is really historically, that's missed across healthcare, it's missed across research, and the fact that you all are recognizing this and really taking them as, like you said, partners and
Yes.
advisors and
Hmm.
consultants to what you're doing is just it's beautiful, and I'm biased, but it's the way healthcare should be, and it's so I love that that's a direction you all are going into as well. I think my next question, you probably answered a bit through everything, but just in case you have any other words to add, but is there anything that additional that you hope others will learn or gain through all the work that you all are doing? Or
I mean, yeah, I think I sort of probably have touched on it in a
yeah,
sort of nebulous way throughout, but I really think is the global collaboration can be so valuable to answer these questions, and that the way forward is cooperation and openness and collaboration and not competition to answer these questions. We need everybody's brain to
yeah.
solve some of these big questions, and that we are showing what we can accomplish when we're a group of over 100 plus, over 200 plus experts from all realms, all like allied health researchers, surgeons, patients and parents, advocates, everybody working together is what's going to really create a world where we can majorly reduce the burden of hip conditions for people everywhere. So
That's wonderful. And is there anything else? I mean, I think you kind of then just answered my next question in the midst of that. But what opportunities do you see for future hip dysplasia related research, education, or advocacy work? I mean, you're hitting stuff, and you're in the midst of all of it. So
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like I just at the RCT that I mentioned, there's a
yeah,
lot of other. That's one. The thing about RCTs as well, they're really high quality, but they also have to, for the necessity of them, they have to be very specific questions. So there's a lot of different questions that we still need to answer that could be answered within different RCTs. So I think there's a lot of different capacity for future, like very controlled, randomized controlled trials to provide the highest quality evidence to enable a change, a true change in clinical care for optimizing the outcomes for patients around the world. But beyond that, I think just also increased keeping that global collaboration going. I also think there's a lot of opportunity potentially in the artificial intelligence and machine learning space to develop prediction modeling and sort of standardizing and automating diagnoses and measurements and things like that as well, that we truly now have sort of a very solid foundation of data that's available to us to do some of this work within the Global Hip Dysplasia Registry and with our collaboration and the expertise people bring in that realm too.
well, we have very high expectations for you all, and we'll be excited to follow along and join in all ways because it's just incredible work that you all are doing. So I really appreciate you coming on and share. And just
It's
to
my
close
pleasure.
things off, so June, which we're just a couple days away from
Yeah.
June, which is Hip Dysplasia Awareness Month, and would love to know what you and your team are planning on doing to celebrate the month.
Yeah, well, we're kicking it off on June 1st with our Hip Health Day. I think it's our fifth annual Hip Health
I
Day at this
think
point.
so. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that is going to kick off this. It's perfectly timed on June 1st to kick off the month of hip dysplasia awareness, where we're going to be celebrating this global community of hip experts, which include advocacy groups and patients and parents and other caregivers, as well as research groups and surgeons and allied health, everybody coming together to sort of celebrate this open collaboration and sort of advances that we can make when we all work together for advancing hip health. So that's sort of the best way to kick things off. And our global hip health coordinator, Tamara Dudley, sort of oversees the that bringing that together, and she also sort of will be keeping it going with our um, sort of social media campaign throughout the month with posting different stories and sort of getting people, posting on if you who's a member of your hip squad and doing hashtag hip squad on social media, and going forward with that. And we also will hopefully be timing. We have a few publications that hopefully will sort of time to be coming out that in the month as well that we can celebrate. So
Well, so exciting. And I'm not sure when this interview will be rolling out, but we will be highlighting International Hip Health Day and encouraging everybody in the Miles for Hips and extended communities to join in, because I think I've joined all 5 years that you've been doing it. And it's
yes, yeah, you've
amazing.
been
It's a
great.
wonderful celebration. It's so much fun. Um, yes, and we will be following along with everything that you all are doing and sharing and
Well,
collaborating.
likewise,
So
I mean, Miles for Hips is such a fantastic group and such a fantastic initiative. I'm really excited to see how our two teams can collaborate together as we go forward. I think we'll be able to tackle a lot of really important things together. So,
absolutely. So much work to be done, but great people
yes,
doing it. So, well,
yes.
listen, Emily, thank you so much for joining today.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank
Have
you
a
for having
wonderful
me.
afternoon.
Thank you, you too.